Okay, you're good, Susan.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Facebook. Okay, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Booklist's third RA Conversation, sponsored by a Forensic Novelist. Hi, Novelist, thank you. The first two, which were Keeping in Genre Shape and Rogue Book Group Choices, those are archived at booklistonline.com in case you didn't see them the first time or you want to revisit the magic of the previous RA Conversations. So I want to thank the Chapel Hill Public Library for hosting us today. I can't believe I didn't say public. And especially to Shannon Bailey for making all of the arrangements and making sure we were able to be here. And did anyone else in library school miss the class where they told you how much time you had spent setting up and taking out chairs and reading? So anyway, on that note, I'm Susan McGuire, speaking of chairs, and I'm the senior editor for collection management and library outreach at Booklist, which means, like you, I sit at my desk and read all day. It's very easy. But I also spend a lot of time writing about books and talking about books with my fellow librarians. And in fact, before I joined Booklist, I was the reader services coordinator at the Chapel Hill Public Library, where we are today. So very excited to be back on home turf. So like all Reader's Advisory librarians, I have some personal favorites, book-wise, which doesn't affect how I help patrons, but I still have some favorites, and for me, almost all of these favorites are romance novels, because I'm Susan McGuire, and I'm a romance reader. It's true, I know. So if you've ever been to any sort of presentation on romance novels or serving romance readers, you've heard the statistics that romance is a billion-dollar industry, and there are 14 bajillion romance novels published every year. We've all heard it. And there's that one lady up the road who comes in every Saturday and checks out a handful of them, and she's read them all. Or has she? So something that's been a big part of the recent conversation about publishing in general and romance publishing specifically is the lack of diverse voices, particularly from authors of color, but also including LGBT authors. So the most common reasons given for these low numbers of diverse authors is that the books aren't being written, which is not true, that publishers or readers are focused on the quality rather than the race of the author, which that's flawed, we'll just say, and that readers just aren't interested. And because there's this common misconception that readers who aren't Black don't want to read about characters who aren't, that straight readers prefer straight romances, that because a well-established white writer writes Native American characters, that we don't also need those stories from a Native American writer, and that readers of color are able to find themselves in white characters, but white readers are not able to do the same thing in a book with non-white main characters, which, as a romance reader, this seems particularly crazy to me, that we believe that readers will accept a were-otter who's a Navy SEAL, but also secretly a Duke, whose heart has been broken, so he shut himself off from love until his best friend's little sister needs a fake fiance to get funding for her gluten-free bakery in the beachside hometown. But like, we don't believe that we would read a story by an author who isn't white. Like, so, and going along with assumptions like these really does a disservice to our patrons by limiting the stories that we share with them when we're doing Reader's Advisory, and relying on this flawed reasoning that authors of color are not producing work that it's just readers. We're, again, doing our patrons a real disservice because that assumption is false. So, this is a big institutional societal problem that unfortunately in our limited time we're not going to be able to solve today. But I think we can look at the situation in front of us and look at some ways that we can deal with the situation. So that's what we're going to do today. And we know that romance readers read a ton. They're super voracious and we love it. We know they're always looking for new authors. They're pretty open, to who's writing the new were-otter story. They want it. And we know that a lot of romance readers rely on us to provide those suggestions, which is super nice. And we know there's a whole mess of great romance fiction out there that's not getting the attention it deserves because of some of those faulty assumptions that we talked about. So you have readers who want books, and you have books that want to be shared. So I figured, like, why don't we do some of that today? So I wanted to call this conversation Everybody Say Love. First of all, to throw in a quick RuPaul's Drag Race reference. Thank you. Thanks. But more importantly, because readers read romance for the happily ever after. Like, no matter what else is going on, they want that HEA. And while they may have a favorite road to the HEA, like they love a Friends to Lovers, they love a Secret Duke, they love a Were Otter, there's no reason for our heroes or our heroines or our non-binary love interests to look any certain way other than perhaps hunky, right? Thank you for coming in right when I said hunky. So by assuming that patrons are only interested in reading books by or about people who look a certain way, as I said, real disservice to our readers, and making an effort to educate ourselves on how paper works, and suggesting authors who are traditionally underrepresented, we are more deeply fulfilling that reader's advisory mission to put the right book in the hand of the right reader at the right time. So, that's enough sweaty talk from me, golly. So I'm going to bring up two folks who will do a good job of expanding on those themes and telling us how it is and telling you useful things that you can bring back to your reader's advisory practice. So without further ado, Reese Ryan is the author of more than 10, here, let me change the slide, sizzling, deeply emotional romances that feature family drama, surprising secrets, and unexpected twists. And we just coined the term chillionaire, where it's like a billionaire who's not like he doesn't act like a billionaire. Anyway, it's really good. Reese was inspired to become a storyteller by Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, and there's a little of Elizabeth Bennet and Jo March in every heroine she writes. She's the past president of her local Romance Writers of America chapter, and she was a panelist at the 2017 Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. Reese is an advocate for the romance genre and diversity in fiction, and we're super glad to have her with us. And then, from the librarian corner, Jennifer Brannen is the Adult Services Manager for Durham County Library. She's also the chair of DCL's Readers Advisory Committee. There you go. In addition to writing about RA for the past 10 years, she has also presented on various aspects of readers' advisory services at conferences, library schools, and, actual libraries. And she has cats. Come on up, Jennifer, yay! Be careful. So make sure the green light is. So Reese, touch your button once.
Yeah, just turn it off, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. Just when you want to talk. Hi, everyone. All right, so let's get to know you. Reese, can you tell us a little bit about what you write, aside from the chillionaire?
I write sexy, contemporary romance, usually very emotional romances, and I love to throw in lots of crazy family drama, as well as it's usually a revelation of some sort of secret. So some crying, some sexy times, some laughter, some crazy family. We all have it.
Totally relatable, except sometimes rich. So Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with romance readers as patrons?
All right, can you hear me? Okay. I have been working with romance readers as patrons for about a decade, and I was really drawn to this group because I'm a romance reader, and I felt really strongly when I first started presenting on Reader's Advisory that romance readers weren't really being acknowledged and really weren't being discussed, like we were like the secret shame or something, and I was like, no, that's not okay. And so I was a fairly loud and brash proponent for Reader's Advisory, and particularly romance readers, at the library I used to work at in Minnesota. because I felt like there were some folks on staff who gave our romance readers a hard time. And that my romance readers started to feel like they had to apologize. Like they'd come up to me and they're like, oh, there's a display, that's great. And then they'd be like, I don't normally read. I'm like, honey, you can read whatever you want. Read it happily, it's there for that purpose. And I felt like people shouldn't have to apologize for what they read. And in fact, that's a tenet of Reader's Advisory, which is you don't have to apologize for what you read. And so I kind of took the bit between my teeth on that and started presenting and writing about Romance Reader's Advisory because I thought it was a really important topic that at the time was being somewhat overlooked.
Yeah,
So
it's true. I feel like Romance Readers Advisory has had a big growth moment, I guess, since I started being a librarian about a decade ago also. So let's talk about why people read romance. And Reese, I'm going to turn to you first. Why do you think readers read your books? What do they tell you that they like about them? What are they interested in about them?
Okay, so I actually posed this to my reader group because I didn't want to put words in their mouth. So the responses I got were romance, a beautiful love story, laughs and tears, an awesome layered journey to happiness that includes twists, turns, passion, some mystery, and a story that grabs your soul, and don't forget family. Characters that are developed emotionally, so I feel invested and they become tangible. Lots of mentions of characters, great characters, fabulous settings, intense relationship journey, several hours of escapism, sizzling love scenes, lots of sizzling love scenes, lots of emotion, and emotion is repeatedly mentioned, as well as complicated journeys and complicated characters. So, and I know from the escapism perspective, you have two camps of readers. You have readers who say, I read for escape. And so I don't want to get into all that heavy stuff. They don't want to deal with real life issues. And I get that, and that's fine, that's great. You probably don't want to read me. So it's not that I'm so heavy that it's like depressing or anything, but to me it's the opposite. I'm very hopeful when I read about a broken character who has to fight for redemption and then they still get their happy ever after. So I see it as a hopeful thing to read about somebody going through all of those things and to come out the other side. So, and the other thing I think for reading is I love that it takes you places, and we always think about reading transforming you to other places, whether it's Narnia or wherever, Paris, wherever. But I also think of it allowing you to have other experiences of people who are not like you, who don't look like you, who don't live in neighborhoods like you live in, who, whether it's a single mother or somebody struggling with grief or whatever the problem may be. To me, when you get through that reading experience, and hopefully when you come out on the other side, you have a better understanding of real life people that you encounter that have some of those issues. So for me, that's what reading is about, and I think for a lot of my readers, they see a similar thing.
Yeah, and I think like that, there's a sort of things that work together where you want people who are different from you, but you also want to have something that you can relate to about them. So like this character might not express her grief the same way that you do, but there's something that you can connect with because you're sharing that moment. I think that's really powerful, even if it's a smooching book. So Jennifer, turning to patron stuff, when readers ask for romance recommendations or talk about romances in a book club, what do they talk about as reasons why they read romance or are interested in a particular book, or what kind of information do you try to glean from them to help them?
Well, readers read for a lot of different reasons, and I have been a member of a romance book club for several years, and so that has actually helped my reader's advisory practice because you get some really honest, in-depth discussion about what draws people and what draws people to particular books. I'm going to agree with Reese that certainly escapism is a big one, and it can be a primary one, and it can be escape from different things. And I think the more tumultuous the world we live in, the idea of a guaranteed happily ever after has a real, almost visceral appeal. But I also think that romances are very much women's writing, and they deal with a lot of very concerns, very important concerns to women, that's the best way to put it right now, and what they're wrestling with. And I feel like in a lot of ways, there often have been in the past by women for women, and they talk about a lot of the concerns that people are wrestling with, and whether that is family issues or stuff going on with your children, or what's going on with your career, problems in the workplace, or addiction, or PTSD, or all these different things, that those bubble up really quickly, and they bubble up particularly quickly, I think, in category romances, because there's such a quick turnaround time on those, that they can start to address those issues earlier than they might in single title romances. And those are phrases I can explain later, by the way. But I think that it's really important to have that, because what that suggests is that there are other people going through similar issues. And not only are they going through similar issues, they're able to find resolution, and they get there happily ever after. And I think that there's something just fundamentally empowering about that. Hopeful, yes, but fundamentally just, they can, you can too. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned category romances, and Reese, you have written almost exclusively category romances, and specifically for Kamani. So can you talk to folks about what Kamani is, and what the different lines of Harlequin is, and what that means?
Can y'all be sure to speak right into the microphone so Facebook Live can hear? Thank you.
No pressure.
Yes, they want to hear what you have to say.
So Harlequin has all the different category lines, and so each line has a bent toward a different thing. You know, an intrigue is dealing with suspense and thrillers, that kind of thing. They have inspire, which is more either religious or kind of an inspirational line, things like that. So up until still currently, they're Black authors, and mostly Black characters or multicultural characters have been confined to a line called Kamani romance. And so that line is actually one of the lines. It's 5 lines of the categories that are closing, and Kamani is one of those ones that's closing. But Kamani has been, for a go-to for Black readers of Black romance for a long time. So, and now the idea is that these authors are supposed to be integrated into other lines, and we are seeing some of that. So I am hopeful about that, but we will, only the time will tell how well it gets integrated. But that's part of a bigger discussion too in romance, whether or not it makes sense to have only readers of a certain race all on this one line, and everybody else gets to write everything. So, and same thing with the story, putting African American romance in a corner. And so, it's not really, well, I'm gonna go off on a tangent. One of the reasons why I discovered personally, it's important to kind of, as things are in the current market, seek out diverse romances is, when I first wrote my first romance, I didn't really think of it as a romance. I was a chick lit writer. I was a chick lit reader. I was a big chick lit reader. And I'm waiting for chick lit to come back, by the way. Here and so I wasn't thinking of it as romance. And so once I realized that what I was writing was romance, and then I started to realize, I had never really read a Black romance by that time. So I'm like, I gotta go find my people. I don't know who my readers are. So, because I'm mostly reading chick lit and stuff. And so I had always had the thought that most mainstream readers probably had. I just want to read a good book. And so you think, okay, if it's a good book, I'm going to find it. That doesn't always happen. So once I started to look at a lot of the preconceptions I had about what multicultural Black romance was, were completely wrong. I'll discover all of these amazing writers in romances, but not until I specifically looked for them. So the way things are set up now, where a lot of times in a library or in a bookstore, African American romances here, the average mainstream reader is not going to walk in and say, hey, I want to read an African American romance. They're just like, I just want to read a good book. And so by not having them integrated, even Black readers a lot of times would not necessarily go back specifically to that shelf to find that book. So So that is what's happening now with Kamani. They are going to be going through, I thought it was the end of this year, but now I think it's the end of 2019. That they're supposed to be still putting out books, but then after that, during that time, they're supposed to be integrating those writers into other books. So each of the lines, each of the categories have a little bit of a different bit, so that you always kind of know what to expect. And they usually put out a certain amount of books. Kamani put out 4 a month, and Desire, which I write for now, puts out 6 a month. So it just depends on the line.
And the other, well, I'm going to let Jennifer talk about maybe some of the other lines also. But so if you are a selector of romance, you have only a few more months, I guess, to gather all those Kamani titles. That made it a little bit easy for us. But Jennifer, so can you talk about like category romance and why it appeals to readers? These are the ones that, like, I was talking at lunch today, like my grandmother subscribed to Harlequin Presents, and they have, I mean, romance like doesn't have a great reputation, and I feel like the categories have like the less great end of that great reputation, which is wrong. So Jennifer, tell us why they're great.
Okay.
Okay.
I think category romances are interesting for a lot of reasons. As I was getting into a little bit before, because they come out so frequently, they tend to be really responsive to a lot of issues for the readers, and reflect a lot of things going on culturally, and I think that's a really interesting thing to see, because they will be the first books to show that. I think because they come out so much, it's harder for libraries to collect them, and they take up a lot of shelf space. If you have 6 books coming out every month, then your shelves are filled with category romances before you know it. So I think a lot of libraries, unfortunately, don't collect them, and that is too bad, because I think that category romances are, for a lot of people, the gateway into romance. I think a lot of us who started out as romance readers probably got a hold of a category romance pretty early on to do that. And I think that an awful lot of writers get their start writing category romances. And it's interesting because a lot of folks have a happy and prolific career doing category romances, like Reese. And a very different type of romance would be Carla Kelly, who prefers to write category, which makes her hard to collect sometimes. And then you have folks who do both. And then there was a name that we were talking about, Maisie Yates, who does both. She's an example of somebody who does single titles and also still does category romances. And then there are folks who cut their teeth and got started and got on a roll in category romances and have moved on to single titles, and people like Jennifer Cruzy and Suzanne Brockman. So I think that they're really important for both readers and writers. I think people enjoy them because they're comforting in a way. You know how everybody has, a lot of us who are romance readers here, we have favorite tropes. And we were talking about some of those at lunch, like, you know, the lost twin, or the secret pregnancy, or, you know, I'm a duke but nobody knows it, or, and everybody has the ones that kind of push their buttons, and it's comforting. You know, they may be done differently, but if you like that particular path, as you put it, to your happy ever after, category romances are really good for that, because you know that you're going to get some of what's really important to you, and how you get there might be a little different, but you're going to get some of those key points that make romance reading good for you and provide comfort for you and entertain you. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I don't see, yeah, it would be nice if it were easier to be able to collect them in libraries. I think it's kind of a challenge, though. I mean, just lack of space. And unfortunately, category romances also go in and out of print very quickly, which can be problematic.
But I think you touched on this idea of like what appeals to readers, and what sometimes in the romance reading world we call that our catnip. Like when you see a book that like there's a school teacher, then you're like, oh my god, or like a librarian. Librarians love reading about librarians. So like that's your catnip. So you want to read, no matter what happens in the book, you want the librarian book. And I think if you are starting out doing romance readers advisory, it might be useful to read a couple of category romances, so you can kind of pick out like what is different between the billionaire in a Harlequin Presents and a billionaire in a Reese Ryan book, because they are different. And one is like super alpha, like kind of maybe a jerk, but like redeemed by the end. And one is like, you know he's a good guy from the beginning, and he also has a super nice house. So like what's the difference for the reader, and like what's fun about that for other readers? So if you're kind of starting to dip your toe into Romance Readers Advisory, I suggest trying some categories.
Yeah, I agree. And there's always this great book, it's The Librarian and the Rock Star, I think, is the...
That was a Karina Bliss.
Yes.
The Librarian and the Rock Star. We're getting a recommendation.
It's a fun one. It's a fun one. Just saying.
Oh my God, all the librarians. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
So I guess to me, like the most important thing when you're doing Reader's Advisory and when you're talking to readers about another book they might enjoy is that idea of appeal, and like what did you like about the last book that you read, and what do you what are you looking for now that I can help match you with? And I think that as librarians and as librarians we can have a bias, and it is probably most often an unconscious bias, that we're going to put certain books in certain patrons' hands, which is hard to accept. You don't want to think that you're being limited on like racial lines when you're helping people, but think about your patrons who read historical romances, and when was the last time you gave a reader of Sarah MacLean a Beverly Jenkins book? Like do we cross those lines? Are we encouraging that people to read it because it has similar appeal to other historical novels they enjoy, or are we just going based on aesthetics, I guess? So that's kind of like a big can of worms I just opened. Okay, guys, help. No. Reese, I guess as a writer, do you think about like who your audience is when you're writing, and how much of that like goes into is conscious when you're writing? I guess.
Well, I definitely never say to myself, oh, I'm just writing for this particular individual in terms of what they look like, or demographics in that sense. But it's more just, I'm thinking about the experience that reader wants to have. They want to read something with for me, a little bit of a higher heat level. They want to read a story that's going to make them, mad at me because they're going to cry. That kind of thing. I've gotten a lot of 3 a.m. messages on Facebook. You made me cry. So, those kind of things. People who are going to want to read about family, because, there's different niches there. There are some people who, with romance especially, they just want to read about the couple. They don't really care about all these secondary characters and stuff. And my books are usually always pretty secondary character heavy. I love making those crazy family members and friends and pets and kids and just, but always in a way that will enhance the couple's experience, what you read about the couple, as opposed to taking away from the couple. So I'll more look at that, what that particular experience is that the reader is looking for, as opposed to saying, I'm looking to only write for this woman sitting in the corner, in this age range. The age range of my readers seems to be pretty broad. For me, I am 48, but so it veers up a little bit higher, but it's a pretty broad range. I would probably say like 25 to 65 in my readers group.
With the odd 12-year-old in there. Steal the $12 stash. Yeah, so, I don't think about I just think about the experiences, and I think about what I want to read personally. That's kind of what I've done, is what kind of experience do I enjoy reading about, and that has been working for me so far, so don't jinx it. So, I guess, Jennifer, again, going from the librarian perspective, how do you think that kind of stuff affects your practice, and what do you, when you're talking to staff or when you're presenting, like, how do you help people overcome that?
Well, I think there's some basic guiding principles to Reader's Advisory that are really important. And part of it is, yeah, I think you articulated it really well, the idea of what is the experience that the reader is going for. As librarians, we call that appeal factors, but the experience, what they want, what they're hoping to get out of it emotionally. And I think that's really important. And I think we, as people, we tend to want to do shorthand. We want to make assumptions. We want to make leaps. And I think that's not helpful. And one of the things that I always talk about when I'm doing trainings or when I'm presenting on Reader's Advisory is the idea that you can't never judge your reader. I mean, don't judge what they read, but also just, they'll tell you what you want to know if you ask them, and don't assume that you know without asking them. And I think people do that, and I think that's how we inadvertently sort of silo parts of our collection, because we'd assume that our Sarah MacLean reader wouldn't want to read Beverly Jenkins, and that's wrong. They're both fabulous historical romance writers, and it's incumbent upon us to bridge that gap. And I mean, a lot of those same things, you want to know why people, what they're looking for. Are they looking for escape? Are they looking for something that they can relate to? And if so, what is it that they're trying to get at there? I mean, so there are a lot of different factors at play, and those factors cover a lot of ground. I mean, if you're trying to find out what their catnip is, for lack of a better phrase, and if they have really strong passionate ties to certain settings or time periods, or how sensual they want the romance to be, and do they want just a one-off, or are they looking for those big kind of spun out stories with lots of secondary characters who end up getting their own books and get their own books and get their own books, and there are people who like that. They're like, I want a series. Julia Quinn, I think, found that out to her dismay. She wrote the Bridgerton series. It had 8 fantastic books, and everyone's like, where's the next 8-book series? I want it. So there are very definite preferences there that cross lines, so I think it's incumbent upon us to ignore those lines. Some of this is in our head, not necessarily our readers' heads, and I think that's really important to recognize. And it means that we have to do some of our own work on that, and I think that's uncomfortable, but I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary for a lot of what we're doing right now, and it's necessary to be a good reader's advisor too.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I have sort of a willful naivete about this, where it is naive to think I'm just gonna go back to my training because my training was colorblind or whatever, and that's not really true, but at the same time, that is something that I hold on to when I'm talking to patrons is, what are they asking for? They're not asking for a Black romance or a white romance. They're asking for this kind of romance, and so I'm going to give it to them. So, there might be a little wishful thinking there that it's this perfect world, but I think we have to, like Jennifer said, do some work to get there.
In terms of what you were just saying too, like you were saying, not thinking so narrowly about lines of color and stuff, but also I would say sometimes, for instance, I was a person who always read contemporary romance, but it wasn't until I experienced a really good historical that I was like, what, I love historical. It's just the voice. It's that kind of character. So I love unconventional heroines. So as I started to read some in historical, because then you always think, okay, they're tied down, they have all these rules they have to follow, but reading about that kind of woman in any era was exciting to me. So, definitely opening up and broadening what you're thinking about in terms of what the reader wants.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of us who read romance aren't, don't just stay in one lane. And right, there are things that we like, the unconventional heroine, dogs. I mean, not a bunch of dogs. Arrogant rich people, and that's in all genres. You get that in suspense and stuff. And so, yeah, when you're working with a patron, again, getting down to what are you looking for, and what limitations am I putting on what I think you want, and then opening it up. It's that easy. Got it? Bye. No.
That easy or that complicated? Yes.
Yeah. So, Jennifer, do you have any suggestions for, I'm not sure, language people can use for making suggestions across racial or sexuality lines, or some sure bet titles and authors who have kind of really broad appeal to help you get started?
I'm not sure that there is any specific language. I think it is just saying, here's this good book. If you are really into sort of modern day fairy tales and something that's really romantic and emotional, well, The Bollywood Affair by Sonali Deb is a fantastic example of that. You don't have to just present it as this fantastic, hey, these are what you like from what you're telling me, give this a try and see what you think. And I mean, it's basic in some ways, crossing that bridge, I think. But in mind, how many people here have seen Hamilton? Hamilton fans, anybody? Okay.
There's like 4 people.
I know, it's shocking.
Facebook.
It's
Only
actually
4 of them.
genuinely shocking to me. I thought I was going to see half the room fly up. Okay, so when Lin-Manuel Miranda accepted his Tonys, and he won several of them for Hamilton, he actually had the best acceptance speech at one point. And it was a sonnet, and it was a sonnet in part that he wrote to his wife, and in part, I think, on a much broader scale. And the final part of it is love is love is love is love. And I feel like that is fundamentally what we're trying to get at here, and that we don't have to limit ourselves, and we don't really have to limit our readers, because there's so many versions of it out there, and we get these ideas in our head about, well, this person, you know, we're making the assumption this person is straight. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. So we don't recommend books to them, because that's the other thing, is we're making assumptions about what people will be interested in and find attractive on the basis of gender and perceived sexuality, and that's something else that we have to pay attention to. Because we'll have this idea about, well, they wouldn't want to read a gay romance, to which I have 2 words for you: fan fiction. So yes, they probably would, or a lot of people probably would. And I think that we have to kind of continue looking for those artificial barriers, because more of them are up than we think. And, you know, I was actually going to say about recommending Beverly Jenkins, so you kind of beat me to the punchline on that one. Another writer that I think is kind of a sure, I don't know if she's a sure bet, but she ought to be. If none of you have read Alyssa Cole, this is her most recent one. She has...
We've got some nods from the audience. I'm glad.
She's done a lot of historical, like fantastic historical fiction, but she is moving into contemporary fiction, yay us. And so if you have anybody who's into royal romances, or, you know, princesses in waiting, the commoner princess Cole kind of thing.
Or if you're making a display for a royal wedding.
Just
would anybody
if
be
something
doing
happens
that
to be coming up,
soon?
yeah. You know, I think that, give her a try, seriously so. And you will find that there are other writers who have a really good track record being inclusive and being diverse in their characters. I think Suzanne Brockman is an excellent example of that. She, ever since she started writing from her category romances on, she has had just an incredibly diverse group of characters, and all of these characters get their happy ever after eventually. And she actually started a fairly significant subplot, and this was several years ago. This was a good 15, maybe 20 years ago, with a gay FBI agent named Jules Cassidy. And he was a secondary character, and he was a secondary character that everybody loved. And so she kept bringing him back. And he eventually got his own romance. And what's more, he eventually got his own book where he got married after a suitable number of romantic hero, you know, hurdles and travails. And I think that was kind of a groundbreaker, because that really was like, hey, diversity is part of the mainstream. It's the lives we live, so why wouldn't we want to read about things that reflect the lives we live? And I mean, she's talked about it in that way. But I actually want to read a quote. How many of you have heard of a writer named Alicia Rye?
A lot of hands in the air. Facebook, we have a lot of hands.
So she's actually getting a lot of buzz now, and she has been interviewed on NPR, which is how we know that romance has broken into the mainstream. We have the Washington Post has a column, the New York Times has just hired a romance columnist, and we have articles on NPR, so we've hit the big time. But she had this really, I think, interesting to what we've been talking about thing to say, so I clipped this quote because I wanted to get it out there. And she said, even now when RWA released the statement saying that no black author has ever won the Rita Prize, there were a number of comments on social media from non-Black, non-authors of color saying, well, it's possible that maybe Black people just don't read romance or write romance or whatever. It's ridiculous to think that when you have stats like that, and honestly, my readership is so vast, it sort of encompasses everyone. It's not a case where I only have South Asian readers because I'm South Asian. It's not a case where Black authors only have Black readers. We have everybody because romance is romance. And she ties into love is love is love, and any of its permutations, no matter who writes it. So,
Yeah, awesome.
Side commentary.
Yes, do it.
Because I absolutely love Alicia. She is absolutely wonderful. So the only thing that was kind of interesting about that for me is that that article came up based on the whole situation with RWA about there being no Black women writers. So it was interesting to me that an article about Black women writers being ignored actually ignored Black women writers by not quoting one. So she's fabulous, and she did a fabulous job with the quote. However, it's just interesting that you want to talk about, if you're going to write about bakers in Chapel Hill, you're going to interview a baker in Chapel Hill, not a dog walker in Durham. You know what I'm saying? It's not that hard. But you would think. So, like I said, she did a fantastic job. And I do adore her.
yeah, I noticed that too, but the quote was so sort of perfectly encapsulated what I figured we were going to be talking about today, that I wanted to get it out there and maybe go look up the full interview because it's very much worth listening to or reading all the way through. One thing I will say is that part of what we need to do as readers advisors right now is I think we need to seek out writers of color. We need to seek out LGBTQ writers, because sometimes they will come to us, but sometimes they won't. So we have to go looking for them because they are there. And we have to speak up as librarians. We have to speak up so that our readers connect with these writers. And I think we have to speak up as librarians and as readers ourselves in the places that we have, which is in our reviews, in our blogs. And when we go to those library conferences and we have a chance to chat with those folks at all those publishers' tables, to be saying, hey, that was great. I loved that. My readers at my library loved that. Give us more. They need to hear that. That is a message that we need to give, because they can tell themselves all kinds of things, but if they actually have readers saying no, and librarians saying, no, that's not true, this is what checks out, this is what people are interested in. I mean, how many of you have heard of a bookstore called The Ripped Bodice?
A lot of hands.
Hands
there.
up again. And they do a study on diversity in romance, and one of the things that is really striking is that their bestsellers almost consistently are romances by women of color. So.
Should I drop this? So that is a good segue, but before we segue into me letting you take over this computer, Reese, can you tell us what is coming up for you in a post-Kamani world, or just in Reese's writing world in general?
The last couple of years have been pretty crazy for me. So last year I had 5 or 6, I think it was 6 books put out last year. And this year I have 5 books out. So last year I wrote primarily for Kamani, but I also wrote Secrets of the A-List, one of the Secrets of the A-List episodes for Harlequin. And then this year, my debut with Desire was just in March, Savannah Secrets. And then so I have more in that. The series is called The Bourbon Brothers. So I just actually signed contract for 5 more books with Harlequin.
And when are you going to sleep?
Yeah, that's what my husband has asked. That's what my husband has asked. So yeah, so there's 4 more brothers because it's a family of siblings. So there's going to be a lot more Bourbon Brothers books coming up, as well as some others. So the Texas Cattlemen's Club, I'm also doing a book this year and next year in the Texas Cattlemen's Club.
All right, so all you complicated family readers, bookmark Reese Ryan's website, because she writes a book a week, apparently. Putting us all to shame. So let's talk about keeping up with that stuff. Segue. So Jennifer, I'm going to let you come drive and talk about some of your favorite resources for finding romance.
Easier to find. Okay. So the-
Am I driving?
You might be driving.
We'll stand here together.
No, my. All right, so,
Speak into the microphone.
yeah,
Sorry.
Now this is.
I'm being annoyed. Can you
No.
turn the volume up at all on it?
See, I didn't think I was that quiet a talker. I know my friends would say I'm that quiet, so.
I think it's just the Facebook people.
Facebook, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick trip through some of the resources that I use and the resources that I recommend to folks. I'm gonna make just a super quick acknowledgement of Novelist. I'm not gonna talk too much about it because we have a guest star from Novelist who's going to talk to us about it. I will say though that it is a tremendously handy database and that they have been doing a lot of great work in the past couple of years on expanding subject headings and searchable terms and appeal factors and tropes. They've been doing all this fabulous stuff, so you can search by your catnip now more than ever. And a lot of this has been starting in their kids section, but it is rolling out through their adult section, and it is a lot of fun. And they have some discovery headings that are very useful, but I'm gonna let Jennifer Lohman talk about that in a little bit. There are certain things, there's certainly a lot to be said for traditional journals. So Book List and Library Journal and Publishers Weekly, all stuffed with reviews, and reviews are the food of life in this regard. And I'm gonna give a shout out to Book List because Book List has searchable reviews online. So that is a really useful thing because even if you happen to read Book List and tab it and circle books that you're interested in, it's still really nice to have that searchable review database. So a few that I'm going to talk about. I'm a big fan of Book Riot. They have a much more sort of lighthearted approach on some stuff, but they have a lot of really fabulous articles and they have some fabulous newsletters. And if you have not subscribed to their romance newsletter, I strongly, strongly suggest that you do so, because it has everything from upcoming attractions to what books are getting made into movies, to book reviews, to discussion of a lot of the things that we are talking about now. And some really smart discussion about a lot of the things we're talking about now. So some of the articles that you will find when you go digging through on Book Riot, you will find things like trans-friendly romances. That's an article that they wrote. 22 Black romance writers who aren't Beverly Jenkins is another article that they wrote. They have a lot of fabulous articles and resources, and it's very accessible, and they have lots of links to other book lists and other resources, and it's a great thing to get hooked into. All About Romance is sort of one of the classic sites, and All About Romance, again, has reviews and lots of fairly opinionated reviews from a lot of the folks who contribute to it, and just talks a lot about romance as a genre. It is an excellent one to be familiar with. And of course, Smart Bitches Trashy Books. If you want people who are opinionated about romance, this is the website for you. And one of the things is they understand romance. The folks who run the site and the folks who write for the site understand romance, love it, and sometimes not just in spite of some of the little flaws that come up, but because of them, but it holds it to account. So they can be incredibly funny about romance covers, but they're gonna bust you if you think you're being a lazy writer, or if they think that you are not doing what you should by the genre. They're gonna call folks out on it. But again, fabulously opinionated and a lot of fun to browse through, and I strongly recommend it. They also have a podcast where they will interview romance writers, by the way. And I added one, if you have not visited the website for the Ripped Bodice, I strongly recommend that you do so. And part of the reason I recommend you do so is that they have started doing an annual report on the state of racial diversity in romance publishing, which they will put together in handy PDF form for you to print and look at. And if you want a really clear idea of the disparity who's publishing what and how much, and the disparity that happens between, okay, let me just show you this. See these? So this is a graphic of 100 books. And it says for every 100 books published by leading romance publishers in 2017, only 6.2 were written by people of color, which is sadly down from 7.8 from 2016. So this is what that looks like. Okay, as infographics go, this is a pretty potent one. But it's also, on a less fraught topic, it is also just a great place to rummage and see what people are buying and see what people are reading. And again, usually their top selling books these days are all by women of color. And then, of course, the final, oops, did I overshoot? I overshot. Is women of color in romance. And they have a website, they have a Twitter feed, I believe a Facebook page, and also an Instagram. And if you want to find out, you want to find a lot of new writers, this is a fabulous place to start, and I highly recommend it. Writers can register there, and you can click on their names, you can go to their websites, you can get information about what they've written. It's a very, very useful and much needed tool. So.
And a catnip menu.
And the catnip menu at points.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to just use this one.
Yeah, so one of the things I really like about their website is that you can just click on one of these tropes. And, you know, so a lot of what we've been talking about is matching on the tropes versus some other, you know, biases that we might have. And so here's a website that can help you do just that. And they talk about new releases, and so very useful. So now I'm going to turn it over to another Jennifer. And this is Jennifer Lohman, who's from Novelist. We're taking advantage of the fact that we are in Novelist backyard. And I'm going to let you show us some useful things you can do with Novelist. Is she right behind me, you guys?
Hello. This is way too low for me if I'm going to speak into it.
Do you want this one?
I think so.
Very professional.
I'm too tall for that one. So one of the things that Reese and Jennifer and Susan both talked about were the kinds of catnip that, sorry, my screen changed, but the one on the big screen did not, which threw me off. Oh no. All right.
Oh no, look, it's happening.
Okay. So finding your catnip and what you're interested in, and then as librarians, our job is to find those books for our readers that they're going to be interested in, do the extra work to pull up those books, make sure that they're on display. So when we have display of royal wedding information, we include Alyssa Cole's new book as well as other wedding books out there. So how do you find them? Novelist is all about finding your next great read, and we have lots of access points to discover them. I'm going to come back to this page and just start actually with Novelist. So if you are new to romance, if you don't know much about romance, or if you just like to browse pretty covers, we have a browse by genre piece. You can come up here to browse by genre, or come down and click browse by genre here. And then you can pick your genre that you might be interested in. We're interested in romance today. So we can click our, this is always when you do something live. Oh man.
It logged you out.
It logged me out.
Irony.
Okay, we're logging me back in. Okay, so we're back here. This looks familiar. New and popular. We're going to come to romance. So the genre browsers that are here have information. There's forthcoming romance, there's contemporary romance information, there's that Alyssa Cole book, it says in the theory, that you can browse through. There are recommended reads lists over here. There's some articles about how to learn more about romance as a genre, how to keep up with different romance authors and different romance subjects. I will just point out that these change, so what you see in these browse information changes. The novelists, librarians, and bibliographers put these together, and we designed them so that you have an online display that you and your readers can flip through to see. So the genre browse is a good place to get started. Know that it changes, and know that it has these nice links to some of our lists and some of the articles. We also have recommended reads lists. There's recommended reads list for romance over here. We have one specifically for multicultural romance if that's where you want to start, but again, these change, and we will try and group them more by subject rather than by multicultural romance. So one of the things we're trying at Novelist is to make it easy for you to find a book no matter what you're looking for, whether or not it's soon to be tropes. Themes are coming to Novelist. Romance readers know them as tropes, secret baby, marriage of convenience. We're going to start putting those into Novelist. But if the multicultural is what interests you, we'll make an access point for that. If the trope is what interests you, we'll make an access point for that. If the author's background is what interests you, we will make an access point for that. So we want to make as many access points as possible for you to find the book that is fitting your particular catnip, or that needs to go on your particular display, or that is going to go in your particular bookmark or book list, or is going to show up, you're going to put in your reader's hands. So we have additional lists as well, so we're back on the recommended reads lists. And again, we change these. Our bibliographers will change and put different ones together. I'm just going to point out, this has been my favorite cover of a romance novel since it came out like 2-3 years ago. Every time I see that cover, I just think it's adorable. That's just a side commentary by me. I loved that cover when it came out. And then more additional lists over here. So if you're wondering some of what the bibliographers and novelists do, they put together those recommended reads lists, those genre browse, and also these appeal lists. Appeal is novelists' secret language of books. It's a way to describe how a book feels when you're reading it, not necessarily limited to plot or genre. Our novelist bibliographers put these together, and again, these switch out. But you can browse them as well, so if you come to our appeal mixer, you can select an appeal mix. So one of the hardest things to help someone with for romance is how spicy do they like their romances? So we can come and look and see, maybe does someone want something to be steamy, maybe? And then we can find titles. And you'll notice when these come up that they're not going to be all romance, because again, this is not based on genre. There are non-romance books that can also be steamy. But I can click over to view all. And I can come over to my genre and I can look for, I'm going to look for romantic suspense that's steamy. So as we're trying to find whatever someone's particular catnip is. I promised I would come back to this page. This is on the Novelist page. If you come to Novelist, Idea Center, Learn, we have copies of our appeal books. These have all of those appeal terms, like what does steamy mean? What's the difference between steamy and chaste and Explicit.
And mildly sensuous.
And mildly sensuous. Those are our 4 categories. So what is the difference between all of those? You can download a copy of this. You can read the definitions and what we apply them to. For libraries out there, you can ask for multiple copies and we can send you hard copies of this secret language of books. Other ways to search novelist for your particular interest or what you're filling your display with or helping a patron with. Again, we talk about the difference, creating different access points. So you can find a certain kind of story, no matter what your kind is that you're looking for. A lot of the ways we do this is in genre. So you can search a genre. I'm going to type in GN, which will stand for genre. And I can't type at the same time and talk.
T.
Thank you. So, as a note, you can search for the genre multicultural romances, which is something that the novelist catalogers apply to romances with multicultural characters where that's part of the story. Of course, these are also contemporary romances or historical romances or paranormal romances. This is just a good access point to help you find more books. So I clicked on the side under genre, I clicked on historical romances. So you can find some historical romances with multicultural characters. It's a lot of Beverly Jenkins. I mean, she's awesome, so there's a reason there's a lot of Beverly Jenkins. You can do the same, of course, with contemporary romance. So you can change around your different kinds of searches. If you're looking specifically to broaden your own reading experience and you like historical romance, that's a handy search for you to put together. I'm also going to introduce you a little bit to the advanced search page. One of the things you might want to do is look for romance because you're interested in reading more authors of color. And that might not necessarily be that they're writing multicultural romances, maybe they are, but you're looking for reading more romances written by authors of color. Novelist has author cultural identity as a thing that you can search by. So we can come and we've got tons of author cultural identities that you can search by. Oops, this is the one I wanted. And then we can find romances by East Indian authors. I will point out that we can only give an author note about the author's background if we know it. If we are wrong or we don't have any information and you happen to know the author's cultural background and it would be useful, something to add, there is a feedback button right up here. Please give us feedback so that we can add that information and make our cataloging better. We want our cataloging to be the best that it can be to help you serve all of your patrons. So I'm going to point out that feedback button. If we mess something up or you know something that we don't, please let us know. So those are a couple different ways to search novelist and to look for different particular types of romances. I mentioned genre, but I forgot to mention the genre guide. We also have a genre guide which has our different romances, subgenres of romance in them, including, and I have a hard copy for me to look at, Victorian romances, Western romances, Gothic romances, holiday romances, fantasy romances, just to give you a different idea of the kinds of romances that you can look for as you're looking for different kinds of catnip for your patrons. And you want to know what the different kinds of things that your readers are looking for, different kinds of factors that they may be interested in. So you can hand them all these good books that you're discovering. I mentioned that themes were coming, so I will just, they're not up here yet, so I can't show you, unfortunately, but you will soon be able to search by things like marriage of convenience and secret baby and secret pregnancy and, I'm trying to remember.
Fake relationships.
Fake relationships.
Opposites attract.
Opposites attract.
Enemies to
Friends
lovers.
to lovers, enemies to lovers. Everyone's got their favorite theme. So especially as Reese was talking about looking for what your reader is interested in and giving them a book based on what they're interested in. Your romance readers will know these terms, they will use these terms, they will say these terms, and you will be able to search novelists by these terms and then combine it with all of our other cataloging to really round out your collection and your displays and your book lists, and to make the kind of books you are offering your patrons reflect the kind of patrons that are walking through your door, which is really part of what this is about. So that's your basic introduction into searching novelists, specifically with an eye to romance. And I'll turn it back over to Susan.
Okay, wait, let me put this down.
Hi, Facebook. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Novelist, for bringing us these programs also, and for being also. And when I did Reader's Advisory training here at the Chapel Hill Public Library, one of my rules, because librarians love rules, was to always be reading. And that means reading books, just in general, always read books so you can know what you like and think about what other people might like. But also to help you be aware of what's going on in the book world, what patrons are going to be asking for. So reading things like just browsing the Smart Bitches Trashy Books website, or browsing, hold on, I'm going to try to go to the slideshow while talking. Can I do it? Yes. Oh, hold on. Browsing the WOC and Romance website, and just like clicking through on the tropes, and the titles will start to become familiar, the authors' names will start to become familiar, so when you have that patron interaction in the stacks and you're panic and you forget every book that you've ever read about because you're always reading, some of that stuff you'll have an easier time recalling it. So, do you guys have any questions for us, or Reese, and either Jennifer? Anyone have some favorite romance authors or favorite tricks for helping patrons who love romance? Or tricking people into reading romance? Yes, Reese?
So my question is for Jennifer about, how you compile the list that you pull together, the bibliography, or some of the,
Yeah.
Okay.
I might actually let Hallie answer that.
Yeah, so
Do you mind coming? So Reese asked how these novelist bibliographies come together. So also introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, I'm Hallie Eisenman, and I work for Novelist, and my team puts together those lists. Typically, they are going to be comprised of about 15 to 20 titles that are starred reviews or award-winning books, mostly recent in the last few years, but altogether in like the last 10 years. Majority would be like the last 2 to 3 years. And then we have classics lists as well. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And I like the fact that those are always changing, because when you have a slow desk shift and you've finished checking Facebook, not that any of us would ever check Facebook on a desk, hi Facebook, you can see what's new in Novelist and all kinds of stuff like that. Any other questions or things you want to share?
I'm not a librarian, and I've never heard of talk to your reader advisory, like Lorraine?
Oh my God.
Yes.
You're so the question is, how do I get this reader's advisory from my library? Yeah, if you walk into your library and say, I need a good book to read, like, watch out. Yeah, I think if you just ask, usually staff members will identify themselves. I don't know that some places have like a dedicated reader's advisory desk, or it's part of the reference desk, but the trend now is for more staff to be better versed in helping patrons find awesome things to read. Yeah.
Anyone else have a question?
Is there a way that you can find a group of readers in your area? If, you know, when you wanted to become, someone mentioned being part of a book club, but for romance writers, is there a listing and a location?
So you're interested in local book clubs and writers in general, or like you're asking specifically about the one Jennifer mentioned?
Not necessarily, but about people who would read romance to be part of that reading group.
Yeah, how do you find like-minded romance readers and gather them together? You have to have a microphone to answer the question, Jennifer. So.
Well, Meetup actually is a fabulous place, and that's where we do a lot of our advertising. Also, if you go to your library's website, most libraries have lots of book clubs, and they would dearly love to have more people come to their book clubs. And if your library does not have a romance book club, it is okay to ask for one. Durham County has a romance readers book club, and it meets the first Thursday of the month at the Southwest Regional Library at 7 o'clock, and they are always looking for new people to come and join and talk. And so we have a pretty raucous, opinionated group, so you'd be very welcome to give us a try if you feel like it. But for anything else, seriously, look at Meetup for the whole research triangle, and you'll find a lot of different book club options.
And I think also if you work in a library and you want to build that in your own community, I like the idea of like sneaking a little sign into like the romance section, like hidden amongst the paperbacks, so that people who are browsing there will be like, oh, on Wednesday afternoon, people join together and they just talk about romance. Like, I'm gonna go and see what that's about. Anyway, litter the stacks is my suggestion. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know at what point, how steamy can an actual romance novel get before it is censored?
So the question is, how steamy does a romance novel get before it's censored? And the answer is never. I think that's something that you can talk to your patron about, and it can be a little awkward, but like there are levels of sensuality. You know, Jennifer talked about explicit. That's like probably the kind that would make you blush and you wouldn't tell your mom you're reading. Steamy is, I think most romances fall into the steamy category, where the doors aren't entirely closed for the, I backed myself into a corner, for the love scenes, but you know, it's not, you're not getting all the sights and sounds.
Mildly sensuous.
Mildly sensuous is, you know, so once they start smooching and it's getting serious, the door closes. So you know what's happening behind the closed door, but you're not seeing it.
And chaste.
And chaste is, like, there might not even be any kissing, and there probably won't even be kissing in it. Just sort of that romantic tension and love, like the developing love story without any of the steam. Does that? So it's all out there, but you can help your patrons discover what they're comfortable with reading. Did you have a question, ma'am?
I did. Romance and erotica. So we didn't talk at all about erotica, I mean, that's a completely different genre. And how are you able to distinguish the very steamy romance from the erotica?
So the question is, how do you distinguish the very steamy romance from the erotica? And I think the key is the love story and the happily ever after. So, you know, we talked about the one thing that patrons are looking for, helping all patrons find their HEA, their happily ever after. And with erotica, that is not guaranteed. So the character is going to go on some journey, and it's going to be a explicitly described journey, but it might not end with, you know, some sort of emotional commitment. Yes, ma'am?
I didn't want to hijack the meeting,
Go
but
on.
I just wanted to mention the 2 books that we brought, or if you wanted to talk about.
Do you want to run up here and talk about them?
No, you.
So, for those of you on Facebook, Talia from Macmillan was kind enough to bring us 2 examples of books with LGBT themes, and If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo is, I mean, it's got a strong love story.
Okay.
And then Her Body and Other Stories. And Other Parts.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, I own this book. So. Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, which has LGBT themes and women's body themes, and is really amazing. And so, thank you, Talia and Macmillan.
And there's other copies here too.
Yeah. Anyone have any other questions? Things to share? Want me to flop around some more? So I'm going to take advantage of a couple minutes at the end here to talk about the wonderful things that Booklist does for you in the library world. And I wanted to point out a few things that we have. So even if you don't subscribe to the magazine, and sometimes if you subscribe to the magazine, it's like a library subscription, and so you get your issue like 3 weeks after it came out and stuff. So we have some free resources that you can take advantage of. The first, we have a whole bunch of newsletters, but I'm going to specifically plug the Corner Shelf newsletter, which is where Reader's Advisory meets collection development. And so we talk a lot about books, and we talk about what people are reading, what issues that pertain to Reader's Advisory and collection development, and we try to have fun also. So that is a newsletter that you can sign up for on booklistonline.com. And we also offer pretty regular webinars that are free, and they're an hour long, so you only have to beg for 1 hour off the desk to get it. And the one coming up at the end of April, which is now, is the crime fiction, getting us ready for Mystery Month, which is May. Get it? Alliteration. So, and even if you're not able to attend those are all archived again on booklistonline.com, and they're really useful tools to come back to when you want to do that, always be reading. All right. Any last chance for questions? Okay. So the last slide. Thank you guys for coming, and thank you for listening to us warble on about this sometimes a little awkward topic, but I think it's really important, and I think because romance is so popular, it's a great place for us to make real headway in this conversation about diversity in reading and what readers want, and really serving readers the best way that we can. So everybody say love. You don't have to. But thank you all so much, and say goodbye to Facebook. Bye, Facebook.
Bye, Facebook.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Is it off?
It's off.
Okay.